Welcome everyone. Welcome to the How to Improve Operational Resilience with OT Security Monitoring webinar with Microsoft and PwC. My name is Paulette Lee and I'll be your moderator today at the intro. And this webinar should be about 55 minutes in length. We are broadcasting this webinar through Teams live event, and the recording will be shared with you after the event. So by participating in this webinar indicates that you are giving us consent to be included in the recording. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. We do have experts standing by to answer your questions throughout the session. Thank you in advance for adhering to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct that is posted in the chat window. And now I will turn it over to Sloan Mankis with PwC to introduce our speakers and get us started. Sloan, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paulette. And thank you to all who've joined us today. We've got an exciting topic ahead of us and three fantastic speakers. I will help facilitate on the back end with any questions that you may have. So I encourage you, please put those in the live Q&A, and we'll either be able to address those, as Paulette mentioned, with our experts, as well as at the end with our speakers. So with us today, we have Harshal Joshi, a principal at PwC in our cybersecurity risk and regulatory practice. We also have Phil Naray with us. He is a director at Microsoft of IoT and industrial cybersecurity. And likewise, we have Scott Schill joining us, Director of Cybersecurity Risk and Regulatory at PwC. And of course, myself, I'm a principal in our cybersecurity risk and regulatory practice at PwC. So welcome to our speakers. We are so excited to have all three of you here today to share your perspectives. I know you've done a lot. I'm going to hand it over now to Phil, and you can walk us through what our audiences can expect for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sloan, and welcome everyone. Brief look at the agenda. We're going to talk about some of the differences between OT security and IT security, some examples of real-world attacks, how the Mitre Attack for ICS framework would show one of those attacks, talk about regulations, give a couple of case studies, give a product overview of Microsoft's solution in this space, and then end with a description of how PwC can help with services and implementation around this technology. So first, just a quick definition from Gartner. They defined the term OT, or operational technology security, a few years ago to differentiate from IT security. And the biggest difference is that OT security is about physical processes, physical systems, physical events, whereas IT security is primarily focused on protecting data and virtual containers and servers and endpoints. And whereas IT security has traditionally been focused on confidentiality and privacy, OT security is primarily focused on safety and availability. You'll also find many specialized industrial protocols in these environments. You may have heard of Modbus, but there are probably 100 others, including Siemens S7, DNP3. And these environments also have a number of specialized devices, embedded devices that don't support agents, as well as legacy platforms, because many of these devices have been in place for many years. The environments have traditionally been air-gapped, but that has changed in recent years with digital transformation, providing increased connectivity between IT and OT networks, for example, to gather information for your CRM system. But as well, we're seeing also connectivity to the internet with new industrial IoT devices being introduced. But as a result of that traditional focus on air gapping, today in most industrial and critical infrastructure environments, there is little or no visibility into the risk from IoT and OT threats, compared to the IT environment, where we have typically multiple layers, both at the network layer and the endpoint layer, to detect unauthorized activities. And that risk from lack of visibility into IoT and OT threats translates directly into three types of business risk. The first is financial. We've all seen how ransomware can shut down production. We saw the gas pipeline event a couple of months ago. We saw the major food processor, and this translates directly in both top line and bottom line revenue impact. And you'll see some examples there from past attacks on industrial manufacturers. In the millions of dollars, typically, you can just think of it as downtime translates very quickly into millions of dollars a day in financial losses. The second is IP theft, particularly in manufacturing, with this statistic from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report showing that manufacturers are much more likely to be compromised for theft of IP than other verticals. And then finally, but really number one, safety. And we all care about the safety of our employees. We care about the safety of our surrounding communities. And there have been numerous attacks in the past 10 years, some examples shown here, that resulted in safety incidents. One of the examples from the last 6 months or so was possibly the first cyber attack on a US water utility. You've probably heard of it. The way it happened was the adversary got remote access into this system, probably due to weak credentials or stolen credentials. There was no monitoring in place to detect that access that might have alerted the folks in the plant that something unusual was going on. The attacker was able to manipulate the mouse and the keyboard of a key workstation in the environment and attempted to raise the level of sodium hydroxide by a factor of 100. Luckily, an employee was there, noticed what was going on, and shut down the attack, but it shows the potential. It also illustrates probably one of the most common ways attackers get into these OT environments is through remote access connections that have been set up for employees or third-party contractors and aren't secured in a strong way using multi-factor authentication and VPN. The other example is called the Triton Attack. It happened on a petrochemical facility, and the safety controllers in a plant are designed to shut down the plant when unsafe conditions are reached, such as the pressure or temperature in a given system going above certain thresholds. We're not sure exactly how they got in. It could have been a phishing email, it could have been insecure remote access, it could have been an infected USB drive, but they did get into the IT network. And from there, they used the Mimikatz credential stealing tool to gain remote access credentials that enabled them to traverse through the firewall into the OT network. So even if you have a firewall segmenting IT from OT, there are many open ports in that firewall that you just need for business reasons. In this case, they leveraged legitimate credentials to move through the firewall. They then installed specialized malware on an engineering workstation, which is a Windows-based system that's used to program the controllers in the plant. They then used that malware to deploy a custom backdoor, but first they had to scan the network and find what safety controllers were in the network, what model numbers they were, so they could custom develop that backdoor remote access Trojan to fit into the controller. And they found a way to put it into first the program memory and then eventually the firmware memory using standard commands. So it's a perfect example of living off the land tactics that we've seen in IT kill chains being used in an OT sense. And their goal was to disable those safety controllers and launch a second attack that would cause a major safety and environmental incident. Luckily, they had bugs in their code. They ended up shutting down the plant on 2 separate occasions for 2 weeks, leading to a multi-million-dollar loss for the plant before the attack was discovered. But it shows the potential harm that they could have inflicted. And if you look at that same attack in the Mitre Attack for ICS framework, this is a version of the attack framework that was developed specifically for ICS. And we're going to look at it the way that might look in the Mitre Attack for ICS framework, starting with the OT intrusions. So we're leaving out the first part where they got into the IT network. And now we're using the standard tactics and procedures of the Mitre Attack framework to describe what they did. So compromising the engineering workstation with the malware first, masquerading the malware files as legitimate files that looked like they should be normal, trilog.exe, doing the scanning that I talked about before to identify the Triconix controllers by sending specific UDP packets, moving laterally into the PLCs themselves with the backdoor, moving that backdoor into the firmware region and disabling consistently checks so that there were no alerts for loss of integrity in that code. And then finally, the impact leading to loss of safety and loss of revenue. And you can also read more about the Mitre Attack for ICS framework and the evaluation they recently performed at the link at the bottom. Now, it's no surprise that these environments are being targeted by attackers. First of all, not only do they represent a great source of ransom because organizations are eager to get their plants back online, but they also have highly vulnerable systems. And these are some statistics from the Global IoT and ICS Risk Report, where we looked at real-world network traffic from over 1,800 ICS networks. And you can see here, I'm sure it's no surprise, more than 2/3 are still running older versions of Windows that don't get patches anymore. They're running unencrypted passwords on that network so that once an attacker gets in, all they need to do is sniff the network and move laterally. For many years, they were forbidden from using AV. That's changed over time, but a lot of these systems have not been updated. And contrary to popular belief that these are air-gapped systems, we found that at least 1/4 of them had direct connections to the internet, could have been from a third-party contractor that needed access to their systems, could have been from a board employee that wanted to be able to surf the web at night. We've seen all kinds of situations here. So if you think about the recent attacks that we've seen in the US on our critical infrastructure and manufacturing operations, this is what our new Deputy National Security Advisor said about that. She said, if you're part of a management team on one of these organizations, you need to look beyond just the data theft and data breach approaches that we've used in the past and think of these attacks as a threat to your core business operations, rather than just simply a data breach risk. So let's talk about some recent developments in the regulatory landscape. About a year ago, CISA put out an advisory with very specific recommendations. First of all, they said that we see cyber attackers consistently attempting to compromise industrial and critical infrastructure. And they said, in order to protect yourselves, we recommend, first of all, understanding what devices you have, how they're connected to each other, what vulnerabilities and risks exist in those networks and devices, and then finally, enable continuous monitoring. And this is a key question. If you think that perhaps your OT environment is properly secured today, ask yourself, if an attacker were to compromise my OT network, would we know about it? And in most cases, the answer is not really. And then later, earlier this year, the Department of Energy unveiled a 100-day plan, and this is similar also to the TSA advisory that went out a few months ago, basically saying that we need to modernize our defenses, we need to have real-time situational awareness, and we need to enhance our detection, mitigation, and forensic capabilities, specifically around industrial control systems and OT networks. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues at PwC, who are going to give some examples of case studies of their clients.
Thanks, Phil. Really appreciate that. Again, so my name is Harshal, and again, Phil, you gave a great context of IT versus OT and what's the true threat landscape that we are seeing. And before jumping into the use case, Phil, you mentioned the TSA security directive, and let me take a couple minutes on that. So in essence, that's one of the first few regulations that has really highlighted IT and OT both at the same level. And we have the 30, 60, 90 days within the TSA security directive, across network segmentation, zero trust. But one of the key things that, that directive emphasizes on beyond monitoring of the assets is truly having right visibility of the assets. And that's what we see in the marketplace at our clients, because summarizing everything that Phil just talked about, what you all want to know about is, in today's day and age, what the true sectors around OT security, whether it's energy, whether it's pharma, whether it's industrial products, what are they asking for? What are they really worried about? So TSA security directive talked about segmentation, about zero trust, about account privileges, account patching. But I think, and now jumping into this use case one, and when we look at OT network monitoring, and even at the most basic level, one of the key things that we look at the marketplace is lack of visibility. How many PLCs, how many HMIs, how many RTOs do you have? What is your baseline traffic before you set up any OT network monitoring product and start looking at the anomalies? What's your baseline traffic? And that's where in today's day and age, the clients are grappling with. In this particular use cases, I mean, we worked with Microsoft on Defender for IoT, but the key ask was not a tool. The key ask was around key three requirements: asset intelligence, vulnerability monitoring, and monitoring incident response. So let's talk about asset. Can this particular platform provide proper OT asset discovery? Can they manage asset attributes, and can they identify the right protocols and the activities? When we looked at various tools, and in this particular case, Defender for IoT was on top. It's again looking at the true requirements from a client standpoint. Asset intelligence means different to different companies, but in this case, can the tool ingest live traffic, ingest PCAPs, can alert on new asset connections, is able to manually update certain attributes, so on and so forth. The second requirement is vulnerability management, which is, can this platform passively identify certain things? Can it give the true CVE ratings and vulnerabilities, detection of protocol versions? And last but not least is monitoring incident response. And again, this is around, how can this particular platform in the OT really work with the IT platform on monitoring incident response? And one of the key things that I want to bring up in this use case, and what was differentiated for Defender for IoT, it was ability to make aggressive client selection. Alerts can automatically attach to certain PCAPs, but also how it fits into the process requirements. So 99 out of 100, when a client is looking at OT network monitoring platform, let's say it's Defender for IoT, they're not looking for just for the platform. They're looking for that platform to talk seamlessly to their CMDB, to their SIEM platform, to their whatever platform that may be, whether it's ServiceNow or what Splunk or whatever that Sentinel, whatever that may be. So particularly what we did in this criteria is really created POVs and use cases with regards to not only can this OT platform look at the OT traffic, but can it then seamlessly hand off? Because a lot of times IT is still monitoring, and at the dashboard level, the OT traffic goes into the IT dashboard. So the OT monitoring platform needs to not only get the right protocols at the OT levels, but also need to talk to the IT platforms, aka CMDB, aka SIEM platform, aka whatnot, right? So again, this use case really, again, is more of a how the process, the existing process, can bake into the OT process, and that was one of the key aspects across three things that I mentioned: assets, vulnerability, and monitoring. And that's what we used Defender for IoT to really not only implement that, but integrate that with the current processes. I'll head up to Scott, my colleague, to talk about the second use case and add more to this.
Excellent. Thank you, Harshal, and thank you, Phil, as well. Good afternoon, everyone. Scott Shellman, Director with PwC in our OT cybersecurity practice. It's a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. Just to tack onto a couple of points that Phil and Harshal brought up as we move into this use case. Harshal mentioned the lack of visibility in the OT space across a multitude of different industries. And I think one key point to highlight is that no industry is able to avoid some of the risks that we've talked about today. We've had decades of technology debt, environments in OT that have been built on out-of-date operating systems and very unique processes that require a very diligent approach to identifying assets, identifying threats, and also supporting alerting of the same. We're now finally seeing a real push across the industry to do better in this space, to be able to understand what is going on in OT environments, identify communication pathways that may be coming in and out of those environments, whether it's from your vendors, from folks inside of the organization. And we're seeing, again, a larger push from our executive teams, our government, new regulations coming out that reflect that this is an area of criticality that organizations across the board really need to start paying attention to. We've also seen things like the executive order for securing supply chain, even in excess of the DOE and TSA regulations that Harshal and Phil mentioned shortly ago, that really signify a push and a need to do better in this space. As I shift over to this use case, one of the really cool things about this particular use case where Microsoft and PwC work very closely together in utilizing Defender for IoT to support our customer is that this was actually related to an organization that was heavily involved in the Operation Warp Speed efforts that I'm sure many of you can remember from just this past year and a half or so. In this case, we helped an organization who was a key part of that supply chain to do a top-down and a bottom-up assessment of their OT environment to identify any critical issues that may be evident there as they ramped up their production to support some of those warp speed efforts and getting vaccines out across the country and across the world. Using Defender for IoT, we were actually able to perform deep technical analyses of the OT environments, analyzing packet captures or network traffic that we're seeing in the OT environment, as well as looking at firewall configurations to help us understand, what types of communication pathways are evident in this environment, what types of threats or issues can we, address in the short term, and also help us to understand what types of protocols and communications we may be seeing that really shouldn't be there. And one of the biggest differentiators that came from using Defender for IoT is the really deep signature base that comes with utilizing this tool. In the OT environment, as Phil mentioned shortly ago, there's a lot of unique protocols that are in use that are dissimilar from what you may see in an IT environments. However, Defender for IoT, through years of research, has been able to enhance their signature base to help us to identify these types of assets in OT and IoT environments, helps us to categorize and classify what those assets are, and provide the deep cyber insights that we need to quickly address many of the issues that are evident in our OT environments today. Utilizing anomaly detection and threat intelligence, we were able to provide our customer with an understanding of what assets are communicating in their OT environments today. We're able to help them to identify areas where there may be opportunities to patch issues, and we've also been able to help identify areas where we can help orchestrate some of the alerting to their security operations team to help us better to be more proactive in terms of responding to some of the events that we're seeing today. And again, it was a very close partnership with our Microsoft colleagues, and we're very thankful to have this partnership to be able to work together in this space. With that, I will turn it back over to Phil to carry us through our next section. Phil?
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of Microsoft's approach to IoT and OT security. Also let you know that Microsoft Security is now a $10 billion business and a leader in multiple Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester Waves. So over the years, we've built up our portfolio. Microsoft acquired CyberX, a leader in the OT security space, about a year and a half ago. Recently acquired RiskIQ in the attack surface management space, and also Refirm, a company that specializes in scanning firmware for vulnerabilities. So the company's security portfolio is growing and is a big focus for the company. At a holistic level, there are a number of solutions that come together to make it to enable security teams to detect and respond faster to threats. Azure Sentinel is our cloud-based SIEM and SOAR solution that allows you to gather information both from third-party non-Microsoft products and Microsoft products into a unified view across IT and OT. Microsoft 365 Defender is our XDR, or Extended Detection and Response System, brings together signals from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Office, Microsoft Defender for Identity, and other Microsoft solutions. And then Azure Defender is a series of solutions for protecting your cloud infrastructure and cloud apps. Now, Defender for IoT is an agentless solution that gives you that immediate visibility that Scott and Harshal have been talking about, that folks require to be able to understand what they have in their environments, both what we call brownfield, which is the legacy equipment, as well as greenfield, which is the new industrial IoT equipment that's being implemented in these environments. And this includes all of the usual embedded devices that you might expect, PLCs, DCUs, as well as the Windows and Linux-based systems like HMIs, engineering workstations, historians, enterprise IoT devices like cameras and voice over IP phones. And the important thing here is this is a highly diverse environment. You'll find in different plants, even within the same organization, may have different industrial manufacturers like the ones shown at the bottom. Many organizations have grown through merger and acquisition, and that increases that diversity. But it really doesn't matter what you have in your plant, whether it's these older legacy devices or the new devices. This solution is designed to continuously monitor them. It's an agentless system, requires zero changes to the environment, and as we talked about, uses behavioral analytics to detect unauthorized and suspicious behavior. And these analytics are not generic baselining algorithms. They've been specifically developed for the deterministic environments you'll find in OT. The benefits of Agentless are that it's frictionless, no changes are required, there's no impact on production. It uses technology called passive monitoring. Because of the behavioral analytics, there's no need to configure rules ahead of time. The system learns what's normal and then looks for deviations from that normal. And as mentioned before, many clients have a very tight schedule for implementing this. They may have a board level initiative that has to be completed by a certain time. They may have an audit finding that needs to be addressed. They have limited change control windows for implementing these things. So the fact that it can be deployed in less than 1 day per site, including integration with the SOC, is important. It provides continuous visibility into 3 key things: assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. And as we talked about, it integrates with what you already have in your SOC, because if you think about that Triton attack, it moved from IT to OT. It was a classic kill chain with the adversary moving laterally across. And so you need that bird's eye view across both IT and OT to be able to quickly detect and respond to these attacks. The way it gets deployed is through a virtual or physical appliance, which is a network sensor that connects to a span port on a network switch, collects a copy of the network traffic, analyzes that traffic using deep packet inspection and the specialized analytics we've been talking about, enriched by continuously updated threat intelligence about malware campaigns, adversaries, tactics, and techniques and procedures. And then the information about the assets, vulnerabilities, and threats are displayed on either an on-premises or cloud-connected console. So very important to point out that this solution can be deployed fully on-premises if you prefer. It can also be connected to the cloud, for example, if you want to send the alerts to Azure Sentinel. And some of our organizations have a hybrid approach where most of the monitoring is happening locally, and they only send a subset of the information to the cloud for monitoring and management. For many organizations, this network map that typically gets produced within a few hours of connecting to the network is a big eye-opener. I've heard from organizations they find protocols they didn't think were any longer in their network. They thought they had gotten rid of them years ago, or devices that they had no idea were on their network. And so that level of detail into not only the network topology, but what devices are on the network and how they're communicating with each other, which is those blue lines, turns out to be very valuable both to the cyber team as well as to the operational team themselves. And you can also get very rich detail into the specific devices, as you see here, what type of device it is, who is the manufacturer of that device, what protocols it was using, when it was last seen on the network. This helps with both cyber incidents as well as operational issues. If you have misconfigured or malfunctioning equipment, you can very quickly troubleshoot it. And so it helps the operational team as well as the cyber team. The system produces a vulnerability assessment report that gives you an overall security score for the environment and has specific risk-based recommendations on how to improve that score. And this turns out to be very useful, obviously, in communicating with senior management and the board about the progress that is being made in improving the security posture of the organization, and is typically very helpful nowadays when boards are asking, what is our OT security posture? And then finally, and this is really the most important from a continuous security point of view, are the real-time alerts. And I'm showing you some examples here. Obviously, you might have a policy that says you're not allowed to connect a laptop to the control network, but unless you're monitoring the network to identify a violation of that policy, unless you have that control in place, it's impossible to enforce that policy. And you'll see also there some operational alerts like a protocol operation that failed, a device that is suspected of being disconnected, as well as unauthorized logins, unauthorized remote access, unauthorized programming of a PLC, which obviously would have been something that might have helped in the Triton case when they downloaded their backdoor into that safety controller. And obviously anybody trying to issue a PLC stop command that could bring down a production line is something you want to watch out for. Now, some of these might be legitimate, but you need to be alerted to them in the SOC so you can actually have a workflow that checks with the plant to make sure that something like a PLC programming action or a PLC stop command was in fact a legitimate operation. Quick case study here. This is a manufacturing plant, multi-billion dollars in revenue, heavy equipment and mineral processing plants all around the world in 25 countries. And they had seen how ransomware attacks on other companies in their sector had brought down the plants and caused loss of revenue and also potentially caused safety incidents. And so they looked at a number of solutions, chose our solution because it was easy to implement and provided highly accurate alerts with minimal false positives to avoid fatigue on the part of security analysts. They also were in the process of implementing a zero trust initiative in which they wanted to segment, better segment OT from IT, and even within the OT environment, better segment those sectors or zones, and they used the information from the OT network topology map to do that very quickly. They also identified some misconfigurations in the OT network that allowed them to optimize the plant production as well. And we see this a lot. The initiative, even though it was driven by an initial focus on technology, brought IT and OT teams together that have traditionally been siloed, and in fact led to the creation of a joint center of excellence for global industrial security involving both the IT security teams and the OT teams themselves. And we see this a lot as a key benefit. Now, we often get asked, what does zero trust mean in the context of IoT and OT? Most discussions of zero trust focus on identity, which is very important in IT networks, but in OT networks, it's less about identity and it's more about continuously monitoring the network for unauthorized activity or unauthorized devices. At the left, you'll see the three key principles of zero trust: verify explicitly, make sure that once the attackers get in, it's hard for them to move around, and assume that the attackers are already in your network. How do you prevent them from going after your most valuable or your crown jewel assets? Some basics: patch where possible, not always as easy in OT as it is in IT. Train employees not to plug their phones into the engineering workstation server. Watch out for phishing attacks. Look at all your remote access connections. Get rid of the ones that you don't need, and for the ones that you do need, make sure they're following a very strict privileged access protocol that enforces multi-factor authentication, audits all of the activity, goes through a VPN, etc. In many organizations, through rogue IT, this has not been handled as carefully as it should be. And then the third column is about the benefits of network security monitoring in terms of using the data from network asset discovery to implement your segmentation and monitoring for unusual activity. And then finally, you have to tie it all together in your SOC. This is not a standalone technology that you implement and, where are you going to send the alerts? The folks in the plant want to see some alerts if it's equipment related, but they're not really prepared to handle nation state and cyber criminal attacks. So you need to bring it all together in the SOC with that big picture view. And we often get asked, what are some best practices for improving the collaboration between IT and OT, given that in many organizations, those are in silos. Maybe there's mistrust because in the past, the IT organization tried to enforce IT security practices on OT that don't really work. You can't patch every month necessarily. And so from talking to CISOs over the last 5 years, this is what I've heard are effective best practices. First of all, it's got to be top down. The business needs to understand that this is a business risk that can impact production, that can impact employee safety, and we're all in this together. When a plant goes down, everyone suffers, and OT risk is part of enterprise-wide cyber risk, and therefore the CISO or the CIO are responsible for that risk as well. In terms of understanding the cultural differences between IT and OT, we've heard that assigning folks from one organization to the other is a great way to make that happen. If you assign IT security people to the OT organization, have them actually live in the plants or visit the plants on a regular basis, they'll learn the differences between IT and OT, they'll learn how control systems work, and they'll make relationships with OT people so that when something unusual is going on in the plant, they know who to call, they can have some context around it. And the same thing goes with integrating OT folks into the SOC. So again, in the example of someone programming a PLC or issuing a PLC stop command, it might be legitimate. It doesn't happen that often, but you need to know who to call to find out, is this legitimate or malicious? And now I'd like to hand it back to my colleagues at PwC. We're going to talk about how they can provide various services around this offering to make it easy for you to deploy and operationalize these benefits.
Thanks, Phil. That was very helpful. And again, this is just a continuation of Scott and I were talking about, how we are working with our clients with Defender for IoT in the field. And some of the key things that I want to bring up and hand off to you, Scott, is, but a couple of things even before jumping into the service offerings is, the ask from the board. And we talked about that, both Scott and Phil talked about that, but, third-party security, and third-party doesn't mean just IT vendors anymore. Some of the vendors you saw that, and again, not just naming a few from Emerson to Rockwell to Honeywell, right? Are these vendors secure? And OT, when we do OT assessments, implementation, and managed services, even before Defender for IoT, clients want to know about their OT environment. As you all saw in the last few breaches, some of the victims had to proactively shut down their OT environment, and the reason is they were not clear whether there was true segmentation between IT and OT networks. Phil, you talked about air gapping, and now with the digitization and now what I call the invasion of TCP into the Purdue model, right? All these OEMs are moving from true air gap to functional air gap. They call it integrated solutions where, the OT traffic are fed into the IT network. So again, some of the questions that comes from the client that Scott and I work on actively are, look at our networks, look at the architecture, even before looking at and implementing Defender for IoT. Sure, tell us how our architecture is. Show us the entry points into our OT network. Phil, you talked about Mitre Attack. Can somebody come in and have lateral movement, so on and so forth? What's the visibility into our OT network? So one of the core area of services that we work on with the clients are in terms of really help them understand what the true IT OT network looks like. How is their manufacturing network really linked up to the IT or the management network? The other question that we face that a lot is, even before going into Defender for IoT, why should we use Defender for IoT? How will that help us with the overall business goals and the security KPIs? And then there are a lot of questions on playbooks, right? Can you configure Defender for IoT as it goes into other areas of SOC? What's the playbook for scoring? What's the playbook for configuration? So again, we create playbooks around Defender for IoT, showing how they can really improve the visibility standpoint, the vulnerability management standpoint, the incident response standpoint. Scott, I'll hand it off to you to talk through a few other services, and then I can chime in more.
Sounds good. Thanks, Harshal, and thanks again, Phil. So one thing I like to highlight about the way PwC is working with Microsoft to craft our OT security offerings is really around the fact that OT security is a journey. This is a new place for most organizations and industries today. And it's truly, an environment where you have to approach security in a very unique way. I think many of us have been so used to the IT security approach where, you throw a tool in the environment and we expect it to function the way that we want it to. However, we know that in the OT environment, to Phil's earlier points, we're dealing with assets that, again, are decades old. They're utilizing protocols that, many of us may never haven't seen, in years. And we're also in an environment where safety is a huge concern. And in many cases, using some of the IT security tools that we're so used to in this environment can actually lead to potential malfunctions of these products. So we have to make sure that when we're approaching these types of services, we're doing so with that in mind and treating each of these different types of security capabilities in a unique fashion. So from a PwC perspective, we've crafted our different services utilizing Defender for IoT around that OT security journey, starting off with using the tool to conduct technical and maturity assessments where we can actually use the tool to analyze network traffic, identify and baseline where your environments may be today in terms of what assets you have operating in these environments, what types of vulnerabilities or issues we may be seeing, identifying any malicious communications that may be there or may have been there that have gone undetected, and using that as a way for us to figure out where do we need to take the OT security strategy from here. We use that as a way for us to help organizations build asset inventories, which we know in many cases may not be in existence today or may be currently tracked using manual spreadsheets or lists that may have been grown piecemeal over the years. And we use, again, this tool to help build those inventories, help build out the network diagrams so that we can see what we're working with, and then help our customers to take them through the OT security journey, building out that strategy, understanding what types of capabilities the customer may need to really develop a strong OT security program, and then help them through remediation of the same. Thinking through unique solution architectures customized for their environment that takes into consideration technical limitations that may be there that we need to make sure are part of our program. We also get asked questions around security operations and incident response. Phil mentioned a little bit earlier about having IT as part of your OT security program, and also making sure that you have dedicated OT resources that are working with your security operations team. This is a very important aspect of any program. Again, given the nature that these OT environments are quite different and quite unique. We need individuals that can speak the language of security, but also individuals that understand the operational processes that are going on in your facilities. We help our customers to baseline and normalize traffic so we understand what good should look like, and then help to build custom alerting utilizing Defender for IoT to indicate to our security operations where that normal traffic may be deviating from what we'd expect. We also have a dedicated incident response team that supports our customers with OT IR retainer services as well as response, and also helps to build out some of those incident response plans, playbooks, and procedures so that we understand how to bring IT and OT folks together to participate in these responses. I think the key theme, just to end off on this slide, is going forward for OT, the journey is going to require a combination and a partnership between your IT security and your OT engineering and operations engineers. We can't do this alone, and part of the journey is making sure that we can bridge that communication. Remember that we're working together as a team, and also make sure that we understand that each side, both operations and OT and IT, each can contribute significantly to making sure that we can keep ourselves safe and also keep ourselves secure. Harshal, anything else that I may have missed?
No, I think this is spot on, but I want to just continue on that. And Phil, if you want to jump to the next slide real quickly, which is, as Scott mentioned, OT is a journey, and for a lot of our clients, it's kind of the venturing into the OT monitoring, into the OT platforms like Defender for IoT is a new thing. And the question is, so what kind of data will we get, and what should we do with the data? How does help us understand what are we getting into? And we just want to show that in PwC we have labs. So basically, as Scott mentioned, this is a journey for everybody, which is we really actually take your environment packets and show you how you can do protocol decoding, how you can do network visualization, how you can do deep packet inspection, and show you what you have been missing looking in your environment and what kind of data you will get. But not only that, then we also have environments for integration, whether it's CMDB or SIEM platform, and say this is how you can configure your OT environment and feed into your other IT platforms. Because a lot of times the question comes is, hey, I got an IT team, they're not going to help us configure OT. How can they ingest data? What kind of different KPIs that OT environment should have compared to IT? Of course, patching at OT is not going to be 99.9%. So in the lab, we really simulate everything that you have actually in your manufacturing and show you how it'll actually work in a pilot fashion so that you can digest and create the business case out of that. Scott, anything else you want to add on this?
No, spot on, Harshal. And I would just end by saying, we've built these labs just as OT security advocates ourselves. We know that it's difficult for you to demonstrate a lot of the capabilities that you may need in your own environment, especially when availability and production times are absolutely critical. So part of our service offering here is to help our customers and all of you use these capabilities that we've developed to test these in a secure environment and support some of your initiatives going forward. But Harshal, I completely agree.
Hold on. With that, I believe, Sloan, I'm going to hand it off to you back.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I just wanted to say that I think what we saw in the portfolio of services that PwC offers is that OT security, as Harshal mentioned, is a journey, right? And folks are at different stages of that journey. They may just be starting to understand what assets they have, so they can start with segmentation and zero trust. They may be moving a little further along in understanding the vulnerabilities. They may be more integrated with the SOC in terms of their continuous monitoring and alerting. They might have automated playbooks. So that full sort of journey of maturity is really important to understand, and PwC can help with that. And at the end of the webinar, we'll be posting a short survey, just a couple of questions, just asking you where you are in that journey. Thanks, go back. I'll hand it back to you now.
Well, thanks, Phil, Harshal, and Scott. Fantastic discussion that we've had already. We've had a few questions come in, and I'm happy to facilitate those. I actually would like to start with one that I think is probably on folks' minds. You probably have already covered it, but it's worthy of just addressing head on. So pretty basic, how to handle environments that cannot be connected to the internet. Are they at less risk? Can you talk about that perhaps? And Harshal, I see you shaking your head. Would you like to go ahead and kick off the answer to that question? Thank you.
So that's a great question. And we get this question from manufacturing team all the time. And having grown up as a chemical engineer, we have this, I want to say myth of air-gapped networks or air-gapped environments. And 90 out of 100 times those air-gapped environments are not really air-gapped. That's number one, Sloan. So, whether the outside OEM are coming to maintain them or we patch them even once a quarter, they're not truly air-gapped. So again, the key is we have to treat them as part of the full ecosystem. The second thing is, again, having them air-gapped doesn't mean that we don't have visibility around that, because a lot of times when you procure something and add a new PLC or RTU, if it's air-gapped, it's still, you need to know that you're adding a new asset into your environment, which could really have operational impact if something goes wrong. So from my standpoint, saying it's not connected to the internet is not the answer. We still need to have visibility and monitoring, and then want to make sure that they're truly air-gapped and not just a notion of air-gapping. I'll pause there. Scott, Phil, if you need to add anything there.
I'll just add that it's completely understandable that organizations are reluctant to connect their OT networks to the internet, and to remind everyone that this solution that we've been talking about can be implemented fully on premises if you wish, but also keep in mind that even if we have network sensors in your plant monitoring the OT network itself is never directly connected to the internet. The network sensor has a control port that connects to your corporate network, and from there can get to the internet. There are obviously benefits to cloud-based management and monitoring, and we're seeing in many industries, including in some that you might not think we're ready for, like energy utilities, where various parts of the OT infrastructure are now being moved to the cloud because of the scalability benefits, the simplicity benefits, Obviously, controllers are always going to have to be on premises. They're controlling physical processes. But there are benefits to being able to not only manage your OT environment from the cloud, but also your OT security monitoring systems to have a centralized view across all of your plants and to be able to keep all of those sensors up to date with the latest threat intelligence.
Yep. I would just round out the question by stating, just because an environment may be not connected to the internet, that just means that there are different threat vectors that can potentially lead to an attack, whether that's someone walking in physically and connecting a USB stick to an asset, breaking into a building to perform various functions right there on the asset itself. So utilizing tools like this, whether it's connected to the internet or not, certainly helps with enumerating some of those potential threat vectors and getting rid of those as well. But Sloan, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you for your answers. And a couple of good segues to the next question that I'll tee up that came in. First, just a simple question, but then I'm going to tee up the next question because I think that there was a segue here. How does cloud adoption help with security? Phil, you started to hit on that in your answer to the last question, but a different question that came in that may actually tie in here is, how can you automate OT security alerts within the SOC? That's the first part of the question. And then, are there standard playbooks that can be applied? So maybe Phil, since you started perhaps this question with a little bit of a segue with discussion about how cloud can help unexpectedly, maybe you start off with the answer here, please.
Sure. So we're seeing across cybersecurity that the cloud is becoming an important way to collect a large amount of data and to analyze it in a scalable and simple way that doesn't require managing your own hardware and servers and patches and everything else that goes along with traditional on-premises infrastructure. Again, some organizations prefer to keep all of their alerts locally, and some send a subset of those alerts up into the cloud. Sentinel, for example, is Microsoft's solution. It's cloud native. It has both SIM and SOAR capabilities, or automated playbooks. You can go to GitHub and you'll see a number of those automated playbooks that are specifically developed for OT environments. Everything from as simple as sending an email to the appropriate control engineer when a ticket is created, to automated responses to block malicious traffic. And the other thing is that again, as I said before, you can't expect the folks in the plant to handle cyber incidents. One CISO told me, if equipment goes down in the plant, the folks in the plant are just as likely to reboot it and keep moving on, when in fact it could be a cyber attack. In fact, that's what happened in the Triton incident, the very first time the plant was shut down. So you need to give the visibility to the SOC, and the cloud is a great way to do that. But at the same time, you need to preserve local access to the information, and so we offer either or both.
Fantastic. So I wanted to just round out these questions and be respectful of people's time. We've got 2 minutes to go. I wanted to mention that there's also Ninja training that would help some folks on their OT security journey. We'll post a link here for those that want to investigate that. And thank you for that. I think we've also, I just point out, if you want to learn more, we've also posted the link in our active chat for you to be able to access these resources, including the joint white paper from PwC and Microsoft describing resilience and OT that we've worked on together. Any final closing comments? Scott, Phil, thank you so much for your speaking today. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you very much, Sloan, for running the show for us. It's great.
Yeah, and from the PwC side, many thanks to our partners at Microsoft for continuing to be a close advocate for OT security, and thank all of you for participating today. We look forward to any questions or inquiries you may have, but thanks again for spending part of your afternoon with us today.
Agreed. So just one last comment. All of the speakers, including myself, our LinkedIn profiles were put in the chat early on. Feel free to reach out to us in that manner if you have follow-up questions, as Scott mentioned. And thank you again for participating.
And thank you, Sloan, and thank you, Phil, Scott, and Herschel for a great webinar today. There is a survey in the chat window for all of the attendees to take, so I appreciate everyone taking that survey. It's a very short survey to help us improve our events such as this in the future. This does conclude today's webinar. Again, thank you for joining. Thank you to all the speakers, and have a great day.